The morning air felt crisp as Linda Taylor walked to her car. The leaves had just started changing colors, painting the neighborhood in warm shades of orange and yellow. Linda loved autumn. It was her favorite time to teach her kindergarten students about nature's changing cycles. At 36, Linda had been teaching for over 10 years at Oakwood Elementary. Everyone in town knew her as the kind teacher with a warm smile who always had time to listen. Her classroom walls were covered with children's artwork, and her students adored her gentle approach to learning. That Tuesday started like any other. Linda waved to her neighbor, dropped a letter in the mailbox, and drove her old blue Honda toward school. She had prepared a special lesson about seasons for today, with paper leaves and cotton ball snow clouds ready in boxes on her back seat. The radio played soft music as she drove along Pine Street, her mind running through the day's activities. She never expected that her entire life would change because of a simple decision to take the back road to school. Halfway there, Linda noticed flashing lights ahead. A small car had hit a street sign, and a young man stood beside it looking confused and upset. Without thinking twice, Linda pulled over. Helping others came naturally to her. "Are you okay?" she asked, approaching carefully. The young man looked barely 20 with a cut on his forehead and shaking hands. "I don't know what happened," he stammered. "I swerved to avoid a dog and then—" He gestured helplessly at his damaged car. Linda helped him sit down on the curb and gave him tissues from her purse for the small cut. She called 911 and waited with him until police and an ambulance arrived. Officer Rodriguez took their statements while paramedics checked the young man, who gave his name as Tyler. "You were very kind to stop," Officer Rodriguez told Linda. "We'll take it from here." Linda thought nothing more of it as she continued to school, arriving just 5 minutes late. Her day went on normally, finger painting, story time, and helping little Zoe tie her shoelaces for the 100th time. She had no idea that her name had already been entered into a police report as a witness. 3 days later, Linda received a call from the police station. "Mrs. Taylor, this is Detective Wilson. We need to ask you some follow-up questions about the accident you witnessed on Tuesday. Could you come down to the station this afternoon?" Linda felt confused but not worried. She arranged for her teaching assistant to watch her class for the last hour and drove to the police station after lunch. The station buzzed with activity, phones ringing, officers moving between desks, the smell of coffee hanging in the air. Detective Wilson, a tall woman with short gray hair, led Linda to a small room with a table and 4 chairs. "Please have a seat," she said, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "This won't take long." Linda sat down, still thinking this was about the young man's accident. "Is Tyler okay?" she asked. Detective Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Patterson is fine, but that's not why we called you here." A second detective entered, introducing himself as Detective Ortiz. His expression seemed harder, more suspicious. Linda felt the first flutter of unease in her stomach. "Mrs. Taylor," Detective Wilson began, "are you aware that the location where you stopped to help Mr. Patterson is very close to the evidence storage facility for the county courthouse?" Linda blinked in surprise. "No, I had no idea. I just saw someone who needed help." "And you've never been to that facility before?" Detective Ortiz asked, watching her closely. "Never. I don't even know what it looks like," Linda replied, her confusion growing. "What is this about?" The detectives exchanged glances. "We're investigating a serious matter involving missing evidence from a high-profile case," Detective Wilson explained. "Your name has come up in our investigation." Linda felt like the floor had dropped from beneath her. "My name how?" "I'm just a kindergarten teacher. Yet you were present at the scene just minutes before security cameras went offline, and certain items went missing," Detective Ortiz said. "That's quite a coincidence." Linda's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of their words. "But I was just helping someone who had an accident." "You can ask Tyler." "Mr. Patterson claims he doesn't remember much about the accident," Detective Wilson said. He hit his head, after all. For the next hour, they questioned Linda about her movements that day, her background, whether she knew anyone involved in the courthouse or the case they mentioned, something about fraud and political donations that Linda had vaguely heard about on the news. "I think I should call my husband," Linda finally said, her voice shaking slightly. "That's your right," Detective Wilson replied. But this is just a preliminary conversation. You're not being charged with anything yet." The word yet hung in the air like a threat. Linda called her husband David, but only reached his voicemail. She left a message trying to keep her voice steady. "David, something strange is happening. The police are asking me questions about some missing evidence. Please call me back as soon as you can." What Linda didn't know, what almost no one in their small town knew, was that her husband wasn't just away on a business trip as everyone believed. David Taylor was actually Justice David Taylor, recently appointed to the Supreme Court, attending a closed judicial conference in Washington. They had kept this information quiet in their hometown, wanting to maintain their private life away from the spotlight. David traveled frequently for work, and Linda had always preferred her simple life teaching children over the formal social circles her husband sometimes moved in. As Linda left the police station, she noticed a black car parked across the street. A man with a camera quickly raised it as she walked to her car. The flash startled her and she hurried away, feeling exposed and vulnerable. That evening, Linda paced their living room, trying David's phone repeatedly. News about the missing evidence had broken on local TV, and to her horror, the reporter mentioned that persons of interest were being questioned. The doorbell rang, making Linda jump. She opened it to find a courier with an envelope. Inside was a court order for her to appear before Judge Richard Harris the next morning for a formal questioning related to the investigation. Judge Harris had a reputation in the county for his harsh sentences and political ambitions. Rumor had it he wanted to run for state office soon. What Linda couldn't possibly know was that as soon as her name had crossed his desk that afternoon, Judge Harris had seen an opportunity. In his office, lit only by a desk lamp, Judge Harris studied Linda's file. A simple kindergarten teacher with no criminal record. Husband frequently away on business. Perfect. If he could connect her to the missing evidence in the Westfield corruption case, it would make headlines across the state. His name would be associated with cracking down on corruption at the highest levels. Even if she's just a pawn, she'll make an excellent example, he murmured to himself, already drafting the statement he would give to the press. The next morning, Linda woke after barely sleeping, dark circles under her eyes. Her phone showed no returned calls from David. She dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a simple navy blue dress with a cardigan, and drove to the courthouse, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She had no idea that Judge Harris had already decided to use her as a stepping stone for his career, nor that her simple act of kindness on an autumn morning had placed her in the perfect position to be framed, and she certainly didn't know that once she finally reached her husband, the entire power structure of Judge Harris's carefully constructed plan would come crashing down around him. For now, though Linda Taylor walked up the courthouse steps alone, a kindergarten teacher about to face the full force of a justice system being manipulated against her. The courthouse loomed over Linda, its stone columns and wide steps making her feel small and powerless. Inside, the polished floors echoed with each nervous step she took. A security guard directed her to courtroom 3, where Judge Richard Harris presided. Linda had never been inside a courtroom before. The wooden benches, the flag standing tall behind the judge's bench, the stern-faced bailiff, it all seemed pulled from a television drama, except this wasn't fiction. This was happening to her. She sat alone on a hard bench clutching her purse. No attorney sat beside her. She couldn't afford one on a teacher's salary, especially not with such short notice. Besides, she still believed this was just a misunderstanding that would be cleared up quickly. The courtroom doors opened, and Judge Harris entered. Everyone stood. Linda noticed how people looked at him with respect and fear. Tall and imposing in his black robes with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, Judge Harris had built a reputation for being merciless with anyone he believed was guilty. Case number 47823, preliminary hearing regarding the Westfield evidence tampering investigation, the court clerk announced. Judge Harris peered down at Linda over his reading glasses. "Mrs. Taylor, I understand you're appearing without counsel today?" Linda stood, her legs shaky. "Yes, Your Honor. I didn't think I needed a lawyer since I haven't done anything wrong." A small smile flickered across Judge Harris's face, gone so quickly Linda thought she might have imagined it. "Everyone has the right to an attorney, Mrs. Taylor, especially when facing potential charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. The words hit Linda like a physical blow. Charges? But I'm just here to answer questions. The investigation has progressed since your visit to the police station, Judge Harris explained, his voice carrying throughout the courtroom. Linda noticed a reporter scribbling notes in the back row. Detective, please present the evidence that brings Mrs. Taylor before this court today. Detective Ortiz approached the bench with a file folder. Your Honor, security footage shows Mrs. Taylor's vehicle passing the county evidence facility 3 times in the week before the evidence went missing. On the day in question, she was present at the scene minutes before the security system experienced unexplained technical difficulties. Linda gasped. That's not true. I only drove that way once, the day of the accident. The court has the footage, Mrs. Taylor, Judge Harris said coldly. Are you claiming the police have fabricated evidence? No, Linda struggled to understand. There must be some mistake. Maybe it was another blue Honda? Detective Ortiz continued as if she hadn't spoken. Furthermore, the young man involved in the accident, Tyler Patterson, has now stated that Mrs. Taylor approached him before the accident occurred, and their meeting didn't seem random. What? Linda's voice rose in disbelief. That's completely false. I stopped to help him after his accident. Judge Harris tapped his gavel lightly. Mrs. Taylor, outburst will not be tolerated in my courtroom. But he's lying. Linda protested, tears forming in her eyes. Mr. Patterson has signed an affidavit, Detective Ortiz added. He claims Mrs. Taylor had previously contacted him about creating a distraction near the evidence facility. She allegedly promised to help with his college tuition in exchange. The courtroom seemed to spin around Linda. Nothing made sense. Why would Tyler say these things? She had only tried to help him. Your Honor, she pleaded, I've never met Tyler before that morning. I'm a kindergarten teacher. I have no connection to any court cases or evidence. There's been a terrible mistake. Judge Harris studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Taylor, the evidence suggests otherwise. This court takes tampering with justice very seriously. The Westfield case involves millions in fraudulent political donations, money that should have gone to public services, including education. As an educator, you should be particularly disturbed by such crimes. Linda felt trapped in a nightmare. I agree completely, but I had nothing to do with it. Then how do you explain your presence at the scene? Your multiple drives past the facility? Your connection to Patterson? I don't know about any drives past the facility. I take different routes to school sometimes, but I've never paid attention to what buildings I pass. And I met Tyler by chance when he had an accident. Judge Harris shook his head slightly, as if disappointed by her denials. In light of the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to continue the investigation with Mrs. Taylor as a person of interest. He shuffled some papers, then looked up again. Given the serious nature of these allegations and their connection to an ongoing high-profile case, I'm placing you under house arrest pending further investigation. House arrest? Linda couldn't believe what she was hearing. But I have to teach my class. Those children depend on me. You should have considered those children before involving yourself in this matter, Judge Harris said coldly. Bailiff, please fit Mrs. Taylor with an ankle monitor. She is restricted to her home except for meetings with legal counsel, if she obtains any, and further court appearances. Linda stood frozen as the bailiff approached with the monitoring device. This couldn't be happening. Just 3 days ago, she had been teaching 5-year-olds about autumn leaves. Now she was being treated like a criminal. Your Honor, she tried one last time, her voice breaking. I've been trying to reach my husband. He's away on business. Can I at least wait until I speak with him? Judge Harris checked his watch impatiently. Mrs. Taylor, the court's decision stands. Your husband is welcome to attend your formal arraignment next week. As the cold plastic of the ankle monitor snapped around her leg, Linda finally understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding. Something deliberate was happening, though she couldn't imagine why anyone would want to frame a kindergarten teacher. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited like vultures. Someone had tipped them off. Mrs. Taylor, is it true you were involved in tampering with evidence in the Westfield corruption case? Did you act alone or were others involved? How much were you paid to remove the evidence? Camera flashes blinded her as Linda pushed through the crowd, keeping her head down. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. A news van from the local station followed her to her car. By that evening, Linda's face was on every local news channel. The headline crawled across the screen. Local teacher implicated in evidence tampering scheme. Her phone rang constantly. Parents of her students, school administrators, curious neighbors. Linda let the calls go to voicemail. She couldn't bear to hear the judgment in their voices. The principal had called first. "Linda, I'm sorry, but we need to place you on administrative leave until this matter is resolved. We've arranged for a substitute teacher." Just like that, her classroom, her sanctuary, was taken away. Linda tried David's phone again and again, leaving increasingly desperate messages. "David, please call me back. Something terrible is happening. I don't understand it. I need you." Later that night, a brick crashed through her living room window, wrapped in paper with a single word: guilty. Linda spent the night huddled in her bedroom, jumping at every sound. The next morning, she woke to find her front lawn covered in trash. Someone had spray-painted "criminal" across her garage door. She closed all the curtains and sat in the dim light of her living room, surrounded by happy photos of her life with David, of her students, of a reality that seemed to be slipping away by the hour. The school board called. They were reviewing her position. The neighborhood association sent a letter about community standards. Even her best friend texted rather than called. "I need some time to process this. The kids are asking questions I can't answer." Judge Harris, meanwhile, was giving interviews praising the swift action of law enforcement in identifying those who would corrupt our justice system. Without naming Linda directly, he made it clear that anyone involved would face the harshest penalties. "We must send a message," he told reporters gathered on the courthouse steps. "No one is above the law, not politicians, not business people, and certainly not those who present themselves as pillars of the community, while secretly undermining our justice system." Each word was another nail in the coffin of Linda's reputation, her career, her life as she knew it. And still David hadn't called back. On the third day of her house arrest, as Linda sat staring at the phone, willing it to ring, she realized she had been approaching this all wrong. David wasn't just away on business. He was at a judicial conference in Washington, D.C., and there were ways to reach someone at such an event, especially in an emergency. With shaking hands, Linda opened her laptop and began searching. She would find her husband. And when Judge Harris discovered exactly who he had chosen to frame, everything would change. The walls of Linda's home, once comforting, now felt like prison bars. 5 days had passed since Judge Harris placed her under house arrest. 5 days of unanswered calls, news reports branding her a criminal, and growing isolation that gnawed at her spirit. Linda sat at her kitchen table, staring at the half-eaten toast on her plate. The ankle monitor felt heavier each day, a constant reminder of her situation. Her attempts to reach David had led nowhere. The judicial conference was apparently under strict communication protocols. No personal calls or messages for security reasons. The doorbell rang, startling her. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Chen, the mother of one of her kindergarten students. Linda hesitated, then opened the door. "I just came to get Billy's lunchbox," Mrs. Chen said stiffly, not meeting Linda's eyes. "He left it in your classroom last week." Linda found the small blue lunchbox with rocket ships on it and handed it over. "How is Billy doing? Is he adjusting to the substitute teacher?" Mrs. Chen's expression hardened. "My son is fine. We've explained that sometimes people aren't who they seem to be." She turned to leave, then paused. "We trusted you with our children, Mrs. Taylor." The door closed before Linda could respond. She slumped against the wall, fighting back tears. Billy was the third student whose parents had come to retrieve forgotten items. None would look her in the eye. All spoke in past tense, as if she were already convicted and gone from their lives. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the principal. "School board meeting tomorrow regarding your position. Given circumstances, termination likely. Can resign beforehand if preferred." Just like that, 10 years of teaching, of pouring her heart into her students, erased because of accusations she couldn't fight. The local news had run a special segment last night. Betrayal of trust. Teacher implicated in court case tampering. They'd shown footage of her classroom, interviewed parents who expressed shock and disappointment. Judge Harris had made another statement, hinting at substantial evidence and connections to larger criminal elements. Linda had watched in stunned silence, unable to recognize the person they described. According to the news, she was a criminal mastermind who had infiltrated the school system to establish a respectable cover while participating in corruption schemes. "Why?" she whispered to the empty house. "Why me? What did I do to deserve this?" The phone rang, her lawyer. After the first hearing, Linda had scraped together enough money to hire Alan Peters, a young attorney with a small practice who was the only one willing to take her case on short notice. "Linda, I've reviewed the evidence they've provided," Alan said, his voice heavy. "It doesn't look good. They have footage of your car passing the evidence facility multiple times. But that's impossible. I rarely take that route," Linda protested. "The timestamps and license plate are clear," Alan continued. "And there's more. They've got phone records showing calls between your number and Tyler Patterson's phone in the weeks before the incident." Linda felt dizzy. "That's not possible. I never called him. I didn't even know him." "The records they've submitted to the court say otherwise." Alan paused. "Linda, is there any chance someone else used your phone? Or your car?" "No. I mean, David uses the car sometimes, but he's been away, and nobody uses my phone but me." "What about your husband? Have you reached him yet?" Linda fought back tears. "No. The conference has some security protocol. No outside communications. That seems unusual," Alan said slowly. "What exactly does your husband do?" Linda hesitated. She and David had agreed to keep his position private in their hometown. They wanted a normal life, not one where people treated them differently because of David's role. "But now, he works in law," she said vaguely. "Government position." "Linda, I need to know everything if I'm going to help you. No half-truths." Before she could respond, there was a loud knock at her door. "Mrs. Taylor! Open up, police!" "Alan, the police are here." "I need to go," she whispered, ending the call. Two officers stood on her porch, faces grim. "Mrs. Taylor, we need you to come with us. Judge Harris has called an emergency hearing based on new evidence." "What new evidence?" Linda asked, heart pounding. "That's for the judge to explain," one officer replied, checking that her ankle monitor was secure before escorting her to their car. Neighbors watched from windows and porches as Linda was led away. The shame burned through her. These were people she'd known for years, who had attended her barbecues, whose children she had taught. Now they looked at her like a stranger, a criminal. At the courthouse, Linda was taken directly to Judge Harris's courtroom. It was nearly empty this time, just the judge. A court reporter, Detective Ortiz, and her lawyer rushing in moments later, briefcase clutched tightly. "Mrs. Taylor," Judge Harris began without preamble, "serious new concerns have arisen regarding your case. Evidence suggests you've been attempting to contact witnesses and potentially interfere with the investigation." "What? That's ridiculous," Linda exclaimed. Alan placed a warning hand on her arm. "Your Honor, my client has been under house arrest. How could she possibly interfere with witnesses?" Judge Harris held up a printed page. "Phone records indicate calls from Mrs. Taylor's home to Tyler Patterson yesterday at 2:15 p.m. Linda shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. I never called him." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Judge Harris continued. "Additionally, Mr. Patterson reports receiving threatening messages from an unknown number warning him to change his story." "I would never threaten anyone," Linda protested. "Your Honor," Alan interjected, "we've had no opportunity to review this so-called evidence. We request time to investigate these claims properly." Judge Harris waved a dismissive hand. "Given the seriousness of these new allegations, I'm revoking Mrs. Taylor's house arrest privilege. She will be remanded to county jail until her formal arraignment next week." The world seemed to tilt beneath Linda's feet. "Jail? But I haven't done anything wrong." "Take her into custody," Judge Harris ordered the bailiff, already gathering his papers as if the matter were settled. Alan argued frantically, citing lack of evidence and proper procedure, but Judge Harris had made his decision. Linda watched in horror as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. "Wait!" she cried out. "Please, just let me try my husband one more time. He can vouch for me." Judge Harris paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "You've had ample time to contact your husband, Mrs. Taylor. The court's patience has limits." As the cold metal closed around her wrists, Linda made a desperate decision. "My husband is Justice David Taylor of the Supreme Court. He's at a judicial conference in Washington." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harris's face went pale. "That's a very serious claim, Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice suddenly less certain. It's the truth, Linda insisted. We've kept it private because we wanted a normal life here. Check if you don't believe me. Call the Supreme Court offices. Judge Harris studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, he nodded to Detective Ortiz. Verify this immediately. While they waited for confirmation, Linda sat with her hands still cuffed, heart racing. She had never used David's position for anything before. They had both valued their privacy, their separate identities. But now, with her freedom at stake, she had no choice. Detective Ortiz returned 15 minutes later. His expression dramatically changed. He whispered something to Judge Harris, whose face grew increasingly ashen. "Remove those handcuffs immediately," Judge Harris ordered, his voice noticeably shaking. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." "Not a misunderstanding," Linda said, finding strength in her anger as the cuffs were removed. "A deliberate attempt to frame me. And I want to know why." Judge Harris cleared his throat. "Mrs. Taylor, in light of this new information, the court will revisit the evidence in your case. You may return home under house arrest until we've conducted a thorough review." "And I want to call my husband," Linda demanded, "right now from your office with a direct line to the conference." For the first time, she saw fear in Judge Harris's eyes. He nodded stiffly. "Of course. Detective Ortiz will escort you." In the judge's private chambers, Linda finally heard David's voice after nearly a week of desperation. "Linda, what's going on? They told me it was an emergency." As she explained everything, the accident, the false evidence, Judge Harris's accusations, David's voice grew increasingly cold with fury. "Put Judge Harris on the phone," he commanded. "Now!" Linda handed the phone to the judge, whose face had lost all color. She couldn't hear David's words, but she could see their impact as Judge Harris sank into his chair, looking smaller by the second. "Yes, Justice Taylor," he kept repeating. "I understand, yes, a complete investigation, immediately." When he hung up, Judge Harris couldn't meet Linda's eyes. "Mrs. Taylor, you're free to go home. All restrictions are lifted pending a full investigation into the handling of this case." Linda stood tall, no longer the frightened, confused woman who had entered his courtroom days ago. "This isn't over, Judge Harris. Not by a long shot." As she walked out of the courthouse, unescorted and unmonitored for the first time in nearly a week, Linda knew everything had changed. David was flying home tonight, and when a Supreme Court justice demanded answers about who had framed his wife and why, those answers would come quickly. The drive home felt surreal to Linda. After days of confinement and fear, she was suddenly free. No ankle monitor, no police escort. The afternoon sun seemed brighter somehow. The familiar streets of her neighborhood more precious than before. She pulled into her driveway and noticed something different. The spray-painted criminal on her garage door had been hastily covered with fresh paint that didn't quite match the original color. Her lawn, previously littered with trash, was now clean. Someone had even placed a small potted plant on her porch. Word traveled fast in small towns, especially news about a Supreme Court justice's wife. Linda barely had time to shower and change before her doorbell rang. It was Alan, her lawyer, looking both excited and confused. "Linda, what just happened?" he asked, following her into the living room. "I got a call saying all charges were being reviewed, and that you'd been released. Then I hear rumors flying around town about your husband being some big-shot judge." Linda smiled tiredly. "Not just some big-shot judge. A Supreme Court justice." Alan sat down heavily. "Why didn't you tell me?" "David and I agreed to keep it quiet. We wanted a normal life here." Linda sighed. "I didn't want special treatment. I wanted to be just Linda, the kindergarten teacher, not Justice Taylor's wife." "Well, that's certainly changed now," Alan said. "The courthouse is in complete chaos." Judge Harris canceled all his appointments for the day and locked himself in his chambers. "And there's a rumor that the FBI is on its way." Before Linda could respond, her phone rang. It was David. "I'm at the airport," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I'll be home in 30 minutes. "Is anyone with you?" "My lawyer, Alan Peters." "Good, tell him to stay." "I've made some calls. People are coming." Within an hour, Linda's modest living room had become the center of a storm. David arrived first, still in his conference clothes, his face lined with worry and fury. He swept Linda into a tight hug, whispering apologies for being unreachable when she needed him. He was followed by two serious-looking men in suits who introduced themselves as Agent Wilson and Agent Tran from the FBI Justice. Taylor requested our involvement, Agent Wilson explained. Given the nature of the situation and the parties involved, we're treating this as a high-priority investigation. Linda described everything that had happened, from stopping to help Tyler after his accident, to Judge Harris's increasingly aggressive actions against her. The agents took notes, their expressions giving nothing away. What I don't understand, Linda said finally, is why me? Why would Judge Harris target a kindergarten teacher? David, who had been pacing the room during her account, stopped abruptly. It wasn't about you, Linda. It was about creating a story, any story, to explain the missing evidence. But why? Agent Tran cleared his throat. The Westfield case involves millions in political donations that were allegedly used to bribe officials. The missing evidence reportedly included financial records linking several prominent figures to those bribes. Including Judge Harris? Alan asked. We can't confirm that at this stage, Agent Wilson said carefully. But you suspect it, David pressed. The agents exchanged glances. We've been investigating corruption in the county court system for months, Agent Tran admitted. Judge Harris's name has come up repeatedly. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Detective Wilson, the female detective who had first questioned Linda at the police station. She looked uncomfortable as David let her in. Mrs. Taylor, she said, I owe you an apology. I followed orders and evidence that I now believe were manipulated. Linda studied the detective's face and saw genuine remorse there. You were doing your job. No, Detective Wilson shook her head firmly. I wasn't, not properly. I ignored inconsistencies because Judge Harris was pushing for quick results. That's not good police work. She placed a file on the coffee table. This contains the actual surveillance footage from the area around the evidence facility, not the edited version Judge Harris provided. Agent Wilson opened the file and spread out several photographs. These show a blue Honda similar to yours but with different license plates. The plates on the car in these images were reported stolen 2 weeks ago. Someone created a double of my car? Linda asked incredulously. It appears so, Agent Tran confirmed. A very deliberate frame job. The next visitor was Tyler Patterson, the young man from the accident, escorted by another FBI agent. He looked terrified as he entered the room, his eyes darting nervously around the assembled group. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Taylor, he blurted out before anyone could speak. They told me what to say. They said they'd drop the charges against me if I cooperated. What charges? Linda asked gently. I was caught with some weed in my car after the accident, Tyler admitted, looking down. Not much, just a joint. But Judge Harris said he could make sure I got the maximum penalty unless I helped him. So you lied about me approaching you before the accident? Tyler nodded miserably. And about the phone calls. I never received any calls from you. They told me exactly what to say. Who is they? David asked. Judge Harris and some man in a suit. I don't know his name. Agent Wilson made a note. We'll need a full statement from you, Mr. Patterson. As the afternoon wore on, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. Judge Harris had personally interfered with the police investigation, insisting that certain leads be pursued while others were ignored. The supposed phone records showing contact between Linda and Tyler had been fabricated. Even the security camera malfunction at the evidence facility had been deliberate, orchestrated by someone with inside access. But the evidence is still missing, Linda pointed out. If Judge Harris took it, where is it? David's phone rang. He stepped into the kitchen to take the call, returning moments later with a grim smile. They found it. In a storage unit rented under a false name but paid for with Judge Harris's credit card. Agent Wilson stood up. That's enough for us to bring him in for questioning. I want to be there, Linda said firmly. David looked concerned. Linda, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she insisted. He tried to destroy my life, David. He was willing to send me to prison for something I didn't do. I need to see this through. After a moment, David nodded. I understand. 2 hours later, Linda sat beside David in an observation room at the FBI field office, watching through one-way glass as Judge Harris was brought into the interrogation room. The man who had seemed so powerful and intimidating in his courtroom now looked small and pale in the harsh lighting. His expensive suit was rumpled, his confident demeanor replaced by nervous glances around the room. Richard Harris, Agent Wilson began, you're here to answer questions regarding evidence tampering, witness intimidation, abuse of judicial authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Judge Harris straightened his tie. "I want my lawyer present." "Of course," Agent Wilson replied. "He's on his way. But while we wait, perhaps you'd like to explain why evidence from the Westfield case was found in a storage unit you paid for." Harris's face drained of color. That's a mistake. Is it also a mistake that you pressured a young man to give false testimony? That you fabricated evidence against Linda Taylor? That you manipulated court proceedings to advance your own interests?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Harris said stiffly. Agent Tran opened a folder and placed several documents on the table. "Financial records showing deposits to your offshore account totaling $750,000 over the past 6 months. Emails between you and Gregory Westfield discussing how to handle the problem. And this," he slid forward a final document, "a draft announcement of your candidacy for State Attorney General, dated for next month." Linda watched as Judge Harris's composure crumbled. His hands shook as he pushed the documents away. "I want my lawyer," he repeated, but his voice had lost its authority. David took Linda's hand. "You were a means to an end for him," he said quietly. "When the original evidence went missing, evidence that would have implicated him in Westfield's bribery scheme, he needed a scapegoat. Someone believable but powerless. A kindergarten teacher who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time," Linda whispered. "He never bothered to check who you were married to," David continued. "He assumed you were just a teacher with no connections, no power, no way to fight back." In the interrogation room, Judge Harris had gone silent, staring at the table as the agents continued laying out the evidence against him. "What happens now?" Linda asked. "He'll be charged?" "There will be a trial, a fair one, not the mockery of justice he subjected you to." David squeezed her hand. "And your name will be fully cleared." "And my job? My reputation?" "That might take more time," David admitted. "But we'll hold a press conference tomorrow. The truth will come out." Linda watched Judge Harris through the glass. The man who had nearly destroyed her life now faced the ruin of his own. She had expected to feel satisfaction, even triumph. Instead, she felt a complex mix of relief, lingering anger, and surprisingly pity. "He had everything," she said softly. "Power, respect, a position of trust. And he threw it all away for money and ambition." David nodded. "Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, Linda. It's about protecting the innocent. Like you." As they left the observation room, Linda's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the principal. "Just heard the news. We need to talk about your immediate reinstatement. The children miss you." For the first time in days, Linda smiled. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Reporters, explanations, rebuilding what Judge Harris had tried to tear down. But tonight she was going home with her husband. And on Monday she would be back where she belonged, in her classroom, teaching her children about the changing seasons and the constancy of truth. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm clouds that had hung over Linda's life for the past week. She stood in front of her closet, considering what to wear to a press conference she had never imagined giving. "The blue dress," David suggested, coming up behind her. "You always look confident in that one." Linda nodded, taking the dress from its hanger. "I still can't believe this is happening. Last week I was teaching 5-year-olds about autumn leaves. Now I'm about to face news cameras. You don't have to do this," David reminded her gently. "Yes, I do," Linda replied, her voice firm. "Judge Harris tried to use me as a scapegoat because he thought I was powerless. I need to show everyone that ordinary people matter, that we can stand up to corruption and win." 2 hours later, Linda stood beside David on the steps of the county courthouse. Behind them were Agent Wilson and Agent Tran from the FBI, Detective Wilson from the local police, and Alan, Linda's lawyer. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing as microphones were thrust forward. David stepped up to the podium first. Though he rarely made public appearances outside of his official duties, he spoke with calm authority, explaining how his wife had been deliberately framed by Judge Richard Harris to cover up the judge's own involvement in corruption. "The evidence is clear and overwhelming," David concluded. "Judge Harris abused his position of power to target an innocent citizen, my wife, believing she would be unable to defend herself. Today we're setting the record straight." He stepped back and Linda took his place at the podium. She had worried she would be nervous, but as she faced the sea of reporters, she felt only a steady resolve. "My name is Linda Taylor," she began. "I'm a kindergarten teacher at Oakwood Elementary. I've taught children in this community for 10 years. Last week I stopped to help a young man who had been in a car accident. That simple act of kindness led to me being falsely accused, placed under house arrest, and nearly sent to jail." She paused, looking out at the crowd. Some of her neighbors were there, parents of her students. Even Mrs. Chen, who had been so cold to her just days ago. I was targeted because Judge Harris needed someone to blame for missing evidence that would have revealed his involvement in taking bribes. He chose me because I was just a teacher, because he thought I had no power, no voice, no way to fight back. Linda's voice grew stronger. He was wrong. Not because I'm married to a Supreme Court justice, though I'm very grateful for my husband's help, but because the truth matters. Justice matters, and no one, regardless of their position or power, should be above the law. Questions erupted from the crowd. Linda answered them one by one, describing how evidence had been fabricated against her, how witnesses had been pressured to lie, how Judge Harris had manipulated the entire legal process to serve his own interests. When asked about Judge Harris's current status, Agent Wilson stepped forward. Richard Harris was arrested last night on multiple federal charges, including obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and accepting bribes. The investigation is ongoing, but we expect additional charges as we uncover the full extent of the corruption. As the press conference ended, Linda felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The nightmare wasn't completely over, but for the first time in days she could breathe freely again. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls and visits. The superintendent of schools personally came to apologize and assure Linda that her job was secure. Colleagues sent flowers and cards. Even some of the parents who had been quickest to judge her reached out, offering awkward but sincere apologies. Monday morning, Linda stood outside her classroom door, listening to the happy chaos of children settling in for the day. The substitute teacher had stepped aside gratefully, leaving Linda to reclaim her space. She took a deep breath and walked in. 20 small faces turned toward her, momentarily silent before erupting in cheers. "Mrs. Taylor is back. We missed you. Tommy ate paste while you were gone." Linda laughed, feeling tears prick at her eyes. This was her world. Finger paints and story time, tying shoelaces and wiping noses. This was what Judge Harris had nearly taken from her. "I missed you too," she said, opening her arms as several children rushed forward for hugs. "Now, who wants to hear about the changing seasons?" The day passed in a happy blur. If the children had heard anything about why she'd been away, they didn't mention it. To them, she was simply their teacher, returned from a mysterious adult absence. At the end of the day, as Linda was cleaning up spilled glitter, some things never changed, the principal appeared in her doorway. "The school board met this morning," she said without preamble. "They've issued a formal apology for how your situation was handled, and they've approved funding for a new anti-bullying program you proposed last year." Linda looked up in surprise. "Really? After all this time?" The principal nodded. "Sometimes it takes a wake-up call to make people listen." "What happened to you?" It made us all think about how quickly we judge others, how easily we believe the worst. She hesitated, then added, "I should have stood by you from the beginning. I'm sorry I didn't." "You were protecting the school," Linda said. "I understand." "No," the principal shook her head firmly. "I was protecting myself. There's a difference." That evening, Linda and David sat on their porch swing watching the sunset. The spray paint on their garage door had been properly repainted now. The broken window replaced. On the surface, everything looked normal again. "The FBI found 3 more judges who took bribes from Westfield," David said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It wasn't just Harris," Linda nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that. About how many people might be sitting in jail right now because of corrupt judges or fabricated evidence." "Too many," David agreed. "The system isn't perfect." "It's not even close to perfect," Linda said. "If I hadn't been married to you, I'd probably be in jail right now. My life would be destroyed." She turned to face him. "What about all the people who don't have a Supreme Court justice for a husband?" David studied her face. "You're thinking about doing something, aren't you?" "I've been approached about telling my story. Books, interviews, even a documentary." Linda hesitated. "At first, I just wanted to put it all behind me. But now I'm thinking, Maybe my experience could help others. Maybe I could use what happened to make some kind of difference. David took her hand. You'd be good at that. You've always been a natural teacher. I want to stay in my classroom, Linda said quickly. Those kids are my heart. But maybe I could do something more too. Advocate for better oversight of judges. Speak up for people who've been wrongfully accused. Justice Taylor and the kindergarten teacher taking on corruption in the courts? David smiled. It has a nice ring to it. Linda leaned against his shoulder. I'm not looking to be famous. When I was sitting in that house with the ankle monitor watching my life fall apart, I felt so helpless, so alone. I never want anyone else to feel that way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Linda thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. One moment of kindness, stopping to help a stranger, had nearly destroyed her. But it had also revealed strength she never knew she possessed, and a purpose she might never have discovered otherwise. The next morning, Linda would return to her classroom. She would teach her students about the changing seasons, about kindness, about standing up for what's right. And in the afternoons and evenings, she would begin the work of sharing her story and fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Judge Harris had chosen her because he thought she was powerless. His mistake wasn't just that she was married to a Supreme Court justice. His mistake was thinking that any ordinary person, any teacher, any citizen, anyone at all, should ever be considered powerless in a system built on justice. As darkness fell, Linda and David went inside, closing the door on the porch where they had watched so many sunsets before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new beginnings. But for tonight, they were simply grateful to be home, together on the other side of the storm.